Hello and welcome back, everyone. I hope you found that first video helpful and that you're excited to dive right back into learning Unreal Engine 5. Now, in our last video, we installed and launched both the Epic Marketplace and Unreal Engine itself. Now, I know that the first time you launch Unreal, it can take quite a bit of time, and if that happened to you, thank you very much for your patience. Today, we're going to pick up right where we left off and get familiar with the editor itself. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of the main aspects of the Unreal Editor, including the layout, panels, terminology, and some essential tools and concepts. Plus, I have a fun little surprise for you at the end, but you're just going to have to stick around to find out what that is. All right, so let's begin here. This is where we left off, and we are looking at the Unreal Project Browser. And first I will draw your attention to the buttons on the left side. There are 5 of them, and starting with the top one, Recent Projects, we can see thumbnails of projects that I've worked on recently. It's a convenient way to get to a project that you want to resume work on, something that's already underway. So for example, I've got this one here called Spaceship Cruiser. And if I were to double click that, it would open up that project and I would be able to continue my work on it. Below our Recent Projects button is this one, Games. Now, I want you to notice that even if I don't click on Games, but if I click on any of these buttons below Games, you're going to see some information here, and it's not always going to be the same. What those are known as, they're known as templates. And templates are basically just starting points to build the type of project that you want to work on. And sometimes that might be a game, but then again, Unreal is such a versatile tool that it's not a foregone conclusion that your project is necessarily a game. So I'm going to do my best to use the term project throughout this course, although I know that I will slip up occasionally and refer to something as a game when I don't intend to. So please forgive me for that in advance. In any case, in the games category, you can see that we've got quite a few templates that correspond to typical game genres. For example, there are first-person games, there are third-person games, there are top-down games, there are handheld augmented reality. AR stands for augmented reality. There are handheld augmented reality games. There are VR games, virtual reality games, and then there are also vehicle games such as racing cars and whatnot. And the templates basically are just a framework that sets you up nicely to work within that genre. You could also make an absolutely blank game and start from scratch. But notice that there are other tabs. For example, film, video, and live events. It has other types of templates that are relevant to doing that type of work. Architecture is the same, as is automotive, product design and manufacturing, and the world of simulation. Now, I should point out that if I start with a given template, I'm not necessarily locked in to using only the features available in that template. The fact of the matter is I could start with any template, quite frankly, and accomplish anything that could be done in any of the other templates if I know what I'm doing. However, it is very convenient to start with a template that is the most similar to the type of project that you want to work on. What I want to work on today is just familiarizing you with various aspects of the editor that you'll be using frequently as you build out your projects. And to do that, I would like to use this template, the third-person template located in the Games category, third person. Okay, so we're going to select that by left-clicking on it one time, not double-click, but left-click. And we have now chosen this template. Before we go any farther, I want to draw your attention down here to the project location. This is giving me a path where this project is going to be saved. Now, you can change this by using the Browse for a Folder button and doing traditional navigation on your computer. I should point out that it's already set. You can see F Unreal Project. So I've got an F drive here, and this particular hard drive is an external USB hard drive, and it's a solid-state drive. And if I just click on there, you can see that I've got a folder. I made this folder. It's called Unreal Projects, and it's where I tend to save my Unreal projects when using this particular hard drive. So I'll cancel that, and that's all this means, okay? So it's telling Unreal to save this project inside of that folder. Now, speaking of project folders, let me get back there, okay? And we're going to go into Unreal Projects. If I open that up, I want you to notice that all these projects have project folders. This is the parent project folder for each project. And Unreal Engine will auto-generate a project folder whenever you make a new project, and it will bear the same name as you enter for your project name. If you were to look inside, you will see other subfolders, and we will get to those in due time. So we're going to close that up and make sure that we have navigated to the folder on your computer or some external hard drive where you have chosen to save your projects, preferably a folder dedicated to Unreal projects. Okay. Next, we have to specify a project name. It defaults to My Project, but I would recommend that you give it a customized name that you will remember. Couple of rules that you should observe. Number one, you cannot use any spaces when naming games and other things. Certain other things in Unreal do not allow for spaces. Sometimes if we have the urge to use a space, we substitute that with an underscore. So for example, if I wanted to separate the words My Project, I could do so as follows: My, and then underscore project. Oops. Okay, My Project. That would be okay for a name. I could also do 001 if that's going to be my first experiment, or let's suppose that, or my first iteration of a certain project. Maybe I want to just do some experimentation in version 1 and increment the version number as I create more and more sophisticated versions of a given project. So that's fine. You should know that you can use alphanumeric characters, but you cannot use certain symbols. For example, if I were to try to include something like an asterisk, let me place an asterisk there on purpose. So I'll hit that. If I wanted to include that as part of my file name, the project browser is going to caution me, project names may not contain the following characters, and it will tell me what mistake I've made. So this will not allow you to even go any further unless you have a validly named project. So I'm going to call ours project, project underscore 001. Okay, project 001. This is going to be a third-person template, or start as a third-person template. And before I hit create, there are just a few things I want to discuss about the project defaults. These top buttons are going to determine which of the two primary programming styles that you are going to use when creating your Unreal Engine project. Most people know that C++ is a common, multi-purpose, traditional programming language. It is syntax-based, and normally when programming in C++, a programmer sits at a terminal and types in lines of code. Blueprint is what is known as a visual scripting language, or a VSL. Technically, you can think of it as a programming language. In fact, Blueprint is based on C++. And the concepts really do cross over quite a bit. Most people, when they're first learning Unreal, unless you come from an extensive C++ background already, when you're first learning Unreal, I would recommend using Blueprint. I should also point out that just because I've selected Blueprint does not prevent me from also using C++. And the reverse, if I were to set this up as a C++ project and I wanted to use Blueprint, I could do that as well. So again, you're not painting yourself into a corner by selecting either one, but you're just setting up some defaults that are going to make life a little bit easier for you when you start your project. So for this first project, I would recommend, again, choosing Blueprint, leaving the target platform set to desktop, presuming that you're developing this on a desktop PC, and use this quality preset maximum, okay? You have a couple more checkboxes here. One says starter content. I think that you should probably check that for your initial experimental projects because it contains certain items that you might use or want to use within your level that you're about to make. The items that are inside the starter content folder are things that we tend to call assets. I know that's a pretty vague term, but assets can be a number of different useful things. For example, an asset could be something like a 3D model, and maybe I want to place that 3D model into my scene. An asset can also be a sound recording that I want to place into my scene so that while the player or user is within that environment, they can hear music or a sound effect whenever it's needed. And starter content has a number of things, a number of assets of different varieties that help us when we are first learning how to build out our environments. This final option, ray tracing, I would recommend that you leave that unchecked. This is more of an advanced graphics concept, and we are not going to be making use of it, at least not anytime soon, in the way that it is meant here, okay? But again, if I leave that unchecked, remember, nothing ever paints us into a corner. So if I set up my project just like this, Blueprint, desktop, maximum quality preset, and I change my mind, I don't have to start over. I can enable any of that stuff even once a project is well underway. But this is going to get us set up for a good start. So we've called it Project 001, and we're going to now hit Create, again verifying that it's going into the appropriate directory. Okay, so we'll hit Create, and then it will just take a moment to launch the editor. And here we go. Watch how fast this goes. This may have taken several hours the first time you did it, or overnight, possibly. But I think, less than 30 seconds? Okay, that's a lot easier to handle, in my opinion. Okay, welcome to the Unreal Engine main editor view. Okay, so let's go through this methodically. We have, first of all, this big center portion of this user interface, and this is known as the viewport. The viewport is your window into the world, so to speak. Any environment that you are creating, regardless of its purpose, we need to be able to see what it is we're working on. And we do that by looking through the viewport. There are other viewports, by the way, throughout Unreal Engine that serve different purposes. But this one is for our main map or level. Those are two new terms if you haven't heard them before. In video games, for example, you might be familiar with the idea of levels, where sometimes you exit one area and find that you emerge in a completely different locale or inside of a different building or something of that nature. Usually video games and other types of projects manage that by keeping certain things contained in separate levels. And that is helpful for memory management specifically. Maps and levels are practically synonyms when working with game engines like Unreal Engine. So sometimes if you're working on a certain level in your game or project, I might refer to it as a map or as a level interchangeably. Now, in the viewport here, we can maneuver so that we can look around in different ways. For example, if I hold down my right mouse button and I move it left and right, you can see that I am basically just changing my view angle. Likewise, if I move the mouse up and down while, again, holding down the right mouse button, I can look upwards or downwards. Okay, so I've got pitch control. I've also got yaw control on this axis. And if I want to move in circles or in any direction, I can look in any direction as long as I'm moving the mouse around while holding down the right mouse button. What if I hold down the left mouse button? Well, if I hold down the left mouse button and move my mouse forward, this will translate the camera forward. And if I hold down the left mouse button, I beg your pardon, and move it backwards, it's going to translate in that direction. Likewise, it will also allow me to look left and right. So I still have yaw control with the left mouse button. If I hold down both mouse buttons together, then it controls my elevation. Okay, so I'm going higher and lower as I drag my mouse up and down. And if I hold down both mouse buttons and drag left and right, then I just get sort of like a movement on this axis without actually turning the direction that I'm facing. Okay, so other ways to do this is if I hold down my right mouse button, you can also use certain keys on your keyboard to navigate this environment. And those are the traditional keys that are used by video games for movement purposes. If you're not someone who is familiar or experienced with video games, they happen to be on the alphanumeric side of your keyboard, W, A, S, and D. W means move forward. S means move backwards. A means move left, and D means move right. So if I hold down the right mouse button and use the WASD keys, I can fly into just about anything I want to look at. And this does take a little bit of practice of getting used to. Okay, so again, I'm holding down right mouse button and being able to fly around my scene. If you find that movement is too fast or too slow, which will depend on the size of the item that you are working on and the detail, the level of detail that you're trying to accomplish, you may find that it's moving too quickly or not quickly enough. So in order to control that, there is a parameter up here in the upper right of the viewport that looks like a little camera. And you can see that if I hover my mouse over that, I get a tooltip. That tooltip says camera speed for the editor. So if I click on that, I can set faster or slower camera speeds using this slider. Now the slider is stepped. Okay, so I want you to know that if I were to go all the way up to 32, for example, and now let's say I press W, wow, that was way out there, okay? Then again, if I want to get back where I started and I set this very, very low, let's say to 0.1, and then I hold the right mouse button and press W, and believe me, I am right now, I'm going to be just creeping up on that location very, very slowly. So let's speed that up a little bit more. And by the way, each main level of speed has a scaler. So you can customize that yourself. So if I scale that up a little bit, you can see it goes a lot faster. So let's reset that back to 1. And if I speed this up a little bit more, let's see, a little bit more. Let's say 0.33. Now perhaps it's easier to tell. Probably not a lot easier to tell, but I am moving forward a little faster than I was. And right now, if I were to set it back to 1, which is the default, that would probably still be slow because of how far away I am. So here's a neat trick. If you have a mouse that has a left button and a right button, but also has a center scroll wheel, you can use the scroll wheel to accelerate or decelerate as you are moving about your project level. So I'm going to hold down my right mouse button again and press W and then scroll up. And that speeds me up, and now I'm going to scroll back and it slows me down. Now I'm going to hold down both mouse buttons and get above this thing. And incidentally, you can also do that by holding down the right mouse button and using letters Q and E on your keyboard. That will also allow you to adjust your elevation. And all of these moves, by the way, obey your camera speed, okay? So you can adjust this according to your needs and the scale of what you might be working on. Okay, so let's set that to somewhere around 1. 1.5 is good. I've been scaling that so it's not whole numbers. All right, but this is fine for now. So I've just flown back into our little environment here and roughly back to where we started, our first person template. Now, all of the game templates are playable. So that means that if I hit the play button, then I will find myself in this environment and able to interact with it in whatever way it's designed to be interacted with. And all that takes is to hit this button right here, the play button. So if I do that, then here I am inside the level itself, and I am playing. And you do have to click, let me just hit escape to get out of here once, and go back into play once more. If I use the WASD keys or try to look in different directions with my mouse, you'll notice that nothing is happening at the moment. You want to get used to, after you've hit play, you just want to make sure that you use either your left or right mouse button to click one time anywhere in the screen. And that will allow you to take control of the character. So I'm just going to click. And now you can see that by using WASD alone, my character is running now in different directions. Guess what I can also do? If I hit the space bar, I can jump. And if I'm running and hit the space bar at the same time, that's a running jump. Okay? If I wanted to, I can also use the mouse while I'm running around, and I can see myself from different perspectives. Above, below, in front, behind. Okay? My character here is able to walk up on these ramps and maybe jump across here and land. Very, very cool. And jump off them. Right now, this character does not have the ability to get hurt by jumping off of something, but then again, we can add that later. Some of the objects that are in this default map, this template level, are interactable. These 3 cubes that you see, for instance, if I were to run up against one of them and bump into it, you can see that it reacts to that collision. And if one bumps into another, likewise. So this is exhibiting physics behavior right now, and physics is something that can be customized and used even to the degree that it would be valid for use in a technical simulation for something that isn't a game. The physics engine in Unreal Engine is very, very robust, and anything that I can think of anyway can really be modeled, okay? So these interactions are basic physics interactions. I can do things like increasing the mass of these and the friction, and I can even change the gravity of the environment and anything else. Really, the sky's the limit. I like to joke very often with my students when they ask me, can such and such be done in Unreal, or can Unreal do this or that? I like to tell them that the answer is always yes, because in my opinion, if you can imagine it, you can do it in Unreal. And if you can't imagine it, even if you can't imagine it, you can probably do it in Unreal as well. So there are very few things that I can think of. Now, if I asked Unreal Engine somehow to make me a pile of cash that was real, I don't think it can do that, but I could certainly simulate that on the computer. So it can do most things that you can think of, and probably most things that you can't even imagine in the first place. So I will eject, or I will escape from the game, and I can do that just by hitting escape, like that. And you'll see that the play button is no longer, well, let me just have you look at this when it's in play mode. It looks like this. Now I can get out of play mode by hitting stop, or I can get out of play mode by hitting escape, either of the two. Here's something else that I'd like to recommend. If you look at this little 3 dots right here, and we left click and open that, you'll notice that there is this option here, and we affectionately call it Pi mode, which stands for Play in Editor, New Editor Window. So it's just like hitting play, except it opens up the play window as a separate window, like this. So I can play around like that if I feel like it, but one really cool feature of the Play in Editor mode is that if I invoke that, and then maximize the window before clicking in that space, now I am playing full screen. And that's a lot of fun to play in full screen mode. Furthermore, if I hit escape, it will remember that that was my last choice. So the next time I hit play, it's going to play in Pi mode, okay? So if you like the full screen experience, as I do, that's something that's probably something you'll want to remember and try out for yourself. So this is the viewport, and again, it's your window into the world. And some of these things that you're going to see, such as this, you're going to learn about in due time. There are various things that are not going to look familiar to you at first, but you'll find out what they are, and they are no big deal. For now, you don't have to worry about them. Okay, I want to talk now about other aspects of this editor. What we have is not only the viewport, but there are various panels that are placed around the viewport. For example, over here, we've got something called the Place Actors panel. Over here, we have something that is used to be called the World Outliner, but now it's just called the Outliner. Anything that exists within my level, for example, this ramp, if I were to highlight it, it will highlight that object in my outliner. Likewise, if I were to highlight something within the outliner, it will highlight, let me find out where that is, it will highlight that item in my scene. So we can select items this way, or I can select items this way. Either way will be reflected in both locations, okay? So we'll have highlighting something here, we'll highlight it in your viewport, and vice versa. If I highlight something in the viewport, it will highlight the corresponding item that is in my scene. And that's good for finding things. Speaking of finding things, if I zoom way out and I don't know where I am, if I click on something and hit letter F, that is for find, and that will take me right to that object. That's a good shortcut to know. Okay, so if I lose track of where I am, maybe I'm going to be way up in this cloud somewhere, and I know I've got to get back to that ramp, and I've lost track of it. Well, here it is in my world outliner, and if in that case, I double-clicked on it, but it's almost the same thing. So let's get out of here one more time, and then I'll just hit F. Now, you might find that it'll take you underneath it or somewhere unpredictable, but you can just navigate around and get your bearings, okay? So that is the find shortcut. And I find myself using that a lot because as your levels get bigger and bigger and bigger, they're going to contain more items inside. Okay, and this is a very, very handy way to find things. All right, let's talk about some of the other panels. This next one is called the Details panel. The Details panel contains information, some of which that can be edited by you, the user, depending on the type of item that you happen to have selected or the type of item that you're working with. For example, if I were to select, let's say, this cube is a certain type of asset, and we're going to use a different term for that shortly. And it's going to have certain parameters associated with it that can be edited and pertain to that type of item. But if I were to select something else that is nothing like this cube, but let's say maybe volumetric clouds, which are the clouds up in the sky, pay attention to the Details panel here. When I click volumetric cloud, you'll notice that the details change because the details are specific to the item type. While we're on the subject, I want to point out that when we place items into our world, our game world or our simulated environment, whatever it happens to be, once they are in our world and in fact accessible through the world outliner, the generic term for them would be actors. Everything in this scene is technically an actor, even if it's not the same type of item. For example, the volumetric cloud that represents the clouds in the sky, that is an actor, even though it's not the same kind of actor as this cube. Nevertheless, the cube is also an actor. This icon here is called a player start, and that just determines where the player character, in this case that robot-looking character that I was playing as a moment ago, that determines where it's going to spawn or appear when you first hit play. And again, the Details panel is going to change to reflect the type of item it is and what you can do with that item. So over here now, we've got something called the Place Actors panel. And the Place Actors panel allows you to just grab things that are frequently needed and literally drag them into a level. Here, what I've just done is I've put a light into the level. This is a point light. There are many different types of lights in Unreal Engine, and you can move things around. Now that I've got this light selected, it's in my world, it has its own Details panel, and I can do all sorts of things with this light. I can change its intensity. I can change its color. Let's change it so it's something really, really obvious, said the colorblind person, okay? And hopefully you can see that changing as I am changing its illumination, its intensity, okay? So that's just a light though, and I can delete that either by clicking on it and pressing delete, or by selecting it in my outliner and pressing delete, and that's no longer in my world. So if it is in your world, it's an actor, okay? If it's not in your world, I guess it's a potential actor, but we would more often call things that are eligible to be placed into the world but are not yet inside the world, we would tend to call those assets. So the Place Actors panel is full of things that can be different types of assets that you can add to your world. Some of them are lights, some of them are different types of gameplay, things that are invisible that influence gameplay, lights, cinematic things, primitive shapes that you can use to build models from, and more. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of this right now. But the frequently needed things, and by the way, even if you were to search under every one of these boxes, there are going to be items that you will not be able to find unless you search for them. So keep that in mind. This does not cover everything, but it covers many of the things that we need the most often. I now want to talk to you about another very, very critical panel that you are going to be using all of the time in editing your Unreal Engine projects. This one is called the Content Browser. Now, right now, it's not visible on the screen, but I can make it visible by holding down Control or Command if you're on a Macintosh And while holding that button down, if I hit spacebar at the same time, that brings up my content browser. My content browser is usually organized with folders, and each one of these folders has assets inside of them, things that can be in your game world. I'll give you a good example. One of those folders is starter content. Now, if you recall, when we created this project, that was one of the options that we had as a checkbox. If we did not check that box when we made this project, we would not have this folder or any of its contents. But if I double click there, I can get into that folder and it has other things. For example, props. If I were to double click the props folder, I can find various starter things that I can use within my level. These are what they are called, in this particular case, these are called static mesh actors, okay? Especially when they are in the world. Right now there are 3D models, and 3D models are called static meshes. We're going to get used to using that term inside of Unreal Engine. So for example, let's take this one, which is a table, and I can literally left click and hold and drag it into my world. Okay, it'll take it a second to look right, okay, and there it is, okay. And there are various ways to move this around and rotate it and whatnot. We'll talk about that in our next video. But you'll notice that my content browser disappeared, okay. Oh, for some reason, my Place Actors panel, it looked like there was a search. So normally it's not as expanded as it looked a moment ago. But you'll notice that my content browser has disappeared. I personally find it inconvenient to have to command spacebar every time I need that. So what I do instead is I like to use this dock in layout feature. But the problem is that it doesn't work by default. And the reason is that, let me just hide it again, Control Spacebar. You'll notice that if I hover over my Unreal Engine icon in my taskbar, that there are actually two windows open, my main editor window, but there's also a separate content browser already opened. And that would be convenient if I wanted to take that and drag it maybe onto a second monitor. But I prefer to just close that. By clicking that, it will only close the content browser. If I were to click this, that would be worse because that would exit Unreal. We don't want to do that. But I want to close the content browser, this extra one, and now I can Control Spacebar, bring up the content browser, and then press Dock in Layout, and it will remain there, okay? This is the classic layout that most of us are used to using. This was the default layout from Unreal Engine 4. And I want to point out that if you ever goof up by accidentally closing certain panels or things like that, windows, whatever, that you know that you need and you can't find them, you don't know what you did, what you could always do is you can go to the window menu, open it, left click, hover over Load Layout, and we've got our default editor layout. So we can click that. We get most of everything back. Notice that the Place Actors panel is missing and the content browser is also missing. But if I wanted that, I could go Window, Load Layout, and this is what I usually choose, the UE4 Classic Layout. When I do that, I get exactly what I want, the Place Actors panel where I'm used to seeing it, the content browser where I'm used to seeing it, and the World Outliner and Details panel where I'm used to seeing them. The Details panel is, well, why do you think there's nothing showing in the Details panel right now? Think about it for a second. Do you think anything will show in the Details panel if I select something from the content browser? Well, I just did and nothing happened. Let's try to choose something else. Nothing happened. Why do you think nothing is showing up in the Details panel right now? Well, the reason is that it is not yet in our world. Right now, anything that is in, for example, my starter content folder, my content browser, and in any folder, if it's not yet in the world, it's an asset. But once I put it inside the world, the virtual world, we call it an actor. Now that table, if I select it, is an actor. And by having it selected, now these are the settings that correspond to that particular actor type. Let's put another actor into this scene. Maybe I will put some sort of shape into here. Let's take a pyramid, okay? And I'll just drop that into there. That's a different type of actor, as is the player start, and as is the volumetric cloud, or any of these other things, even lights, okay? Down here, we've got something called a text render actor, and if I highlight that, you're going to see details that pertain to it. So the details panel, you're going to find that that is going to be seen in many, many places within Unreal Engine. You'll be using details panels for various types of work, and it's dynamic, meaning that it is conditional to the type of object that is being worked with and the context in which it's being edited. So the next thing I'd like to show you is something that we're just going to scratch the surface of today. So let's go back to this table here for a moment. And my camera speed is too fast because I'm spazzing out everywhere. Okay, so this gets me a little bit more under control. So that was in the props directory of our starter content folder. So if I get in there, maybe I can take this chair and I can put it here. The chair is not facing the direction that I would like for it to face. I want it to be rotated towards the table. Now, all of these 3D models that are called static mesh actors, the reason that they're called static mesh actors is, first of all, because they are not deformable. They are meant to be solid, let's say solid objects that do not move or do not, well, they can move, but they cannot change shape, or they're at least not meant to. Okay, static usually means unchanging, so they're just sort of static props. But I can do things with them. For example, I can change their location using the location gizmo, even on this axis. I can use the rotation tool and rotate them on any axis I like. Okay. And I can also scale them using the scaling tool. Make it taller or more squeezed or longer. It's a way of customizing your static meshes, by the way. All of them are scalable. And those tools, the location tool, the rotation tool, and the scaling tool, collectively make up what is known as the transform of that particular static mesh. So let's go back to the location tool, or I should say it's called the translation tool, but that's part of the transform. If I bring this chair way up into the air, you'll notice something in the details panel. The location is what I'm editing right now by moving the location gizmo around. And that is a vector. It's got 3 axes. So for example, if I'm looking at it from this direction and we look at this legend right at the bottom, this is the z-axis. The z-axis is the axis that is the up and down axis for Unreal Engine. Now, depending on my vantage point and the color as it corresponds to the legend down here, let's suppose I'm looking at this from this direction. This would be our x-coordinate, and this would be our y-coordinate, okay? So let's just reset that item, and in fact, I think I put it way over here by mistake. So let's find that chair. This is the origin point of the world, 0, 0, 0 for location. I didn't mean to put it there. So I'm just going to delete it out of my world and place it again. So let's go back here and get that on our table. So we'll take the chair and we'll place it here. Now remember, we've got these three tools that we can use to manually change the transform. However, we can also edit these values here for location. This is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and this is the z-axis. So you can see that as I edit the z-axis, it's going up and down. Let's set that back to default. Oh no, what did I do? I set it back to the world origin. Okay, so let me hit undo a couple of times and get that chair back to where it was. So what I want to do right now is I want to rotate it so that it's facing the table. Which axis of rotation do I want to use? Well, because I want to turn the chair without tilting it in any particular direction, I want to rotate it on the z-axis. And you'll notice that as I edit this parameter, it rotates it in the same way as if I had this tool and I was using that sort of gizmo for it. Oftentimes we'll call these tools gizmos, transform gizmos. Anyway, I could rotate it in other axes as well. And it depends on the needs of your scene. So let's say I wanted more than one of those chairs. Here's something nifty that you can do, a little quality of life improvement. Let's suppose I wanted more than one instance of this chair mesh in the scene. If I hold down Alt and left-click on any of the movement arrows, left-click and hold, and I drag, I'll get a copy. Now let's place that chair in a different location and rotation with respect to the table. Okay, we'll get it closer to the table, and I can rotate it on the z-axis once more according to my needs. And I could have done that here or by selecting the rotate tool and doing it this way. And you can select any tool that you need whenever you need it, okay? So I could put 4 chairs around here, or let's say I want to put this little sofa right there instead of a chair. So I can just drag it into my world, drop it where I want it, and then rotate it either by hand or by editing the transform parameters in the details panel while that object is selected, okay? And now we're going to get it just a little bit closer, okay? And you can always edit these after the fact if you want to make it feel and look the way that you want it to look, okay? So static meshes, why are they called static? Well, we already covered that. They're static because they're meant to be solid objects that do not really change. Let me give you another example, okay? Let's look under starter content in, let's see, architecture. These are for building architectural structures, and this is a 400 centimeter by 400 centimeter wall segment. If I drag that into there, that too is a static mesh actor. But while it was inside of my content browser, it was just an asset. It was still a static mesh, but it's only an actor once it's in your world. And it's also subject to everything that we could do to these other meshes. For example, I can change its location on any axis. I can rotate it on any axis. You'll notice that my rotation is snapping by certain increments. I hope you're noticing that. That can be controlled as well, just like our camera speed can be controlled. We can control all of our transform editing tools. This is subject to all of the same things that these static meshes are. Let me give you yet another example. And we're going to get, again, from starter content, let's just get another prop. And I'm going to use this prop here called Material Sphere. Notice that right now it's sort of like sunken into the floor. So what I would like to do is I would like to place it directly on the floor. Now if I translate it up using the Z-axis translation tool, and if I want a static mesh to snap directly to the surface that's underneath it, I need to have it highlighted, and then I will simply press the End button on my keyboard. and now it's directly on the ground. So if I look way down there, especially if I deselect it, you'll see that it's right on the ground. It's also casting a shadow, which is very cool. What would happen if I were to take this static mesh and bring it up in the air like this? Now, I'll leave it there, but I'm not playing yet. What I will do is I'll take my player start, which is where my character spawns, and I'm going to rotate it so that it's facing the direction that I can see that ball, okay? The arrow component basically will tell you where you're looking, okay? So when I start play, I should see that ball. But what will happen? It just stays up there in the air. Why might that be? I wonder. Well, we can decide whether or not a static mesh is simulating physics. So for example, right now, this ball is not simulating physics. So if I select it here, or just by clicking on it, in the viewport, the details panel is going to change according to what is applicable to this item. And one of those things is whether or not it's simulating physics. So if I turn that on, just by setting that box, we call it setting it to true. Now, by the way, if you have a checkbox that can be only one of two states, not checked or checked, the proper language for that is if it's not checked, it's set to false. And if it is checked, it's set to true. Now, by default, this was set to false, which is why when we play, the ball just sits there. Okay? If I simulate physics, on the other hand, and then hit play, you'll see it fall to the ground. And it will continue simulating physics. For example, if I walk up to the ball and run into it, it should roll away from me. Okay? I don't know, did I miss? My monitor went dark for a second. Okay. So I can bump into this, and it's going to behave according to the physics attributes that have been set for it. Okay? And I like doing that. I like rolling a ball around. Let's get back to where it was, and just for the sake of a little bit of fun, we're going to set its mass to something much greater. Let's set it to 2,000. And I bet that bounce is going to be less pronounced when we go into play. Boom, boom. Okay? That's going to be heavier. And if I try to bump into it myself, it's going to be a lot harder for me to move that, right? Because I just made it a lot more massive. Before, I was able to send it flying just by walking into it. So if I set the mass to something really low, like 10, and there are far more things that we can do with physics than just adjust the mass, but let's try it this way. Okay, so now if I run into it, look at that. Okay, it's behaving as a far less massive object. Boop. Okay, and obviously these are also simulating physics, but not everything is. This object is not simulating physics. If I wanted to push that around, what would I need to do? I would need to select it, and then I would have to click Simulate Physics. And then when I re-enter the game, now I can bump into this and move it around, and it will react to physics interactions. Okay? All right. The last thing that I want to get into today, and this will be, we're going to keep this very, very simple, and it's something that I want you to experiment with. First of all, if you've made significant progress and you've been following along at least roughly with what I've done so far, hit Save All, and it will present you with some things that have not been saved yet, but you might have edited or changed some of the properties. So this is common, and you'll just make sure everything is checked and click Save Selected, okay? Depending on how big your game world is or your project is and the number of things that are in your world, it occasionally takes longer to save. It can sometimes take a long, long time to save things. But right now, we don't have very much going on here. So the next thing I'd like to talk to you about, but in a very basic way, is something called materials. Materials are how we make static meshes and other types of meshes. There are other types of meshes. Just like we have static meshes, we also have skeletal meshes. Skeletal meshes are like static meshes in the sense that they are 3D models, but they are meant to be deformable. So for example, when I'm playing as this character, notice that there are joints and parts of it that move, and if I look really, really closely, you can see that the shoulders and the upper body are showing that it's breathing, things of that nature. This is a deformable mesh, and therefore it's referred to as a skeletal mesh, okay? So in any case, materials can be applied to static meshes and to skeletal meshes. Materials are a type of asset that we use to make an object appear to be made out of something. What is it made out of? For example, this pyramid currently does not have a material associated with it. Or it does, actually. The floor especially does not. That's called the world grid material, prototyping material, you can see right here. And this little pyramid, it does have a material, but it's the same material that is used on that wall. It's like a default. What if I wanted this to look like it was made out of gold or something like that? Well, you can go into starter content. If you've included it in your Project 1, you'll find that there's a materials folder. And if I double click that, you will find that there are many samples of materials that you can use. When you apply a material to a static mesh or a skeletal mesh, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. One way is to simply left-click and hold that material and drag it directly onto the mesh like that. Now let me select a different material just to show a different way of doing this. Let's say I want this to be gold. Okay, I could have done it the same way. However, when I have a mesh selected, it has a material element slot here in its details panel. And it doesn't matter which way I do it. I can drag it right onto there, or I can drag it right into here, and it is the same thing. So for example, if I were to use this, I could just as easily have done this. Or with my gold material, I could have done this, or if I want it to look like burnished steel, I can go like this, okay? So you can have some fun if you wanted to, just putting materials on various things. For example, let's suppose that I want these little boxes, these little cubes, to look like they're made out of some sort of brick material. So we've got clay, brick, new, a few different versions of brick. These are not necessarily materials that are the best that you can possibly obtain, but they give you an idea of how we make things look like they're made out of specific stuff, okay? And certain items might have more than one material slot, and it doesn't look like these do. I was hoping that they might have. Certain more complex meshes will have multiple material elements. For example, if I had a car mesh or something complex like that in my scene, then it might have a material element for just the glass windows. It might have another material element for the body of the car, or a guitar. It could be a guitar. It might have yet another material element for the trim, and then the license plate, and then the bumpers or fenders or interior. So that's something that you'll get used to as well. Multiple material elements. For now, I think everything in starter content, let me just check to see if I can find something that might have multiple material elements. And not in starter content, I don't think. But once we start bringing in more complex meshes, you'll see that. So if you feel like it, let's just place some meshes on this. Let's go for, what should that ball look like? How about water? That would be weird. That's a material, believe it or not. Okay, so now we've got a water ball. And let's say we want this construction panel to look like it's made out of walnut. We can do that. Let's suppose I want it to be polished walnut. I could have just dragged that onto there, or I could just select the mesh and drag it right here. Okay, so you can see that right now it's preparing shaders, so sometimes that has to happen before you actually see the effect of the change. So let me show you the difference between those two materials. Yeah, they're quite similar. Let's compare that to oak. Might need to get a little closer to see that well. Oak. Yeah, I think, you know what? I had the wrong mesh selected. That's what was happening. Oak, worn walnut, polished walnut, pine, another version of walnut, and some type of science fiction material. It could be marble, it could be basalt, which is a type of rock, and so forth. Okay, so have fun and go through here and add materials to your heart's content to all the different meshes. Some of these objects, by the way, are made up of multiple meshes that are put together. So you might have to place materials on more than one chunk, so to speak, and fly around your level with the mouse and WASD and make sure that you are adding materials everywhere you think that you're adding them. Okay, you don't want to miss any spots. And that's easy to do. If I go over here, yep, you see, I missed this whole thing right here. So let's get that material on there. Notice that I used a different material on the floor than I'm using for these platforms, just for variety. And this one has an end cap also. Want to make sure that I get it on all of those meshes. And all of a sudden, we've got something that's a little bit customized here. I'm not saying that these materials are exactly perfect for everything, but they're a start. Maybe I will use this stuff on the wall. Well, that's not the best looking thing I ever saw. So let's use the same thing that we used for the floor on these walls. And again, I can select it here or here and just as easily drag the material to where it says Material Element 1, and that does the same thing. While you're here, we might as well acknowledge the obvious fact that any given material, when it is applied to a mesh, is going to stretch and deform according to the scale of that mesh. And that is not always desired, okay? So do be cognizant of the fact that if I take a given material and I place it onto an object, it might appear rather stretched or squashed in ways that are undesirable. But all of those things are editable, and we will be learning about that very soon, most likely in our very next video. So for today, I would recommend practicing this a little bit, setting up an environment, change out the materials, maybe enable and disable physics on a few things, change where your player start is. Let's put the player start somewhere else completely. So let's lift up and get this to a different location in our map, like on top of this platform. It's useful to check from multiple vantage points because sometimes your eye will be tricked. And again, I want to make sure that this is flush, not buried in and not high above, but flush with this surface. So I raise it up on the Z-axis and press End. And now, if I enter play, that's where I spawn from. And now I'm in this crazy world that we've just made for ourselves. Go through my little doorway there, and this is a lot different from how it started. Okay, so there is one last thing I would like to go over today, and it's that surprise that I promised you at the beginning of today's video. This, I think, is something that you're going to enjoy doing, and it's always something that I love to do myself, which is to play around with the direction of the sunlight. And that is easier to do than you might imagine, and it has a profound effect on the mood of the scene that you're creating. So in order to do that, there is a very, very simple technique. All you have to do is hold down Control and L simultaneously on your computer keyboard. And that's what makes that little dome appear, holding down Control and L. Now, if you hold down your left mouse button, excuse me, you don't even have to hold it down, I beg your pardon. You just have to move your cursor around. And you can see that this can have even small changes. You can see the little sun disk flying around there. Even little movements there can have a profound effect on things like the shadows and the color of the horizon and the way things are generally lit for your scene, right? So I love playing with that. So if I wanted to create a little sunset, what I could try to do is figure out where that is, maybe that, okay? And this is technically the directional light, and that can be found in your World Outliner. If you can't find it by scrolling, you can always just type DIR in the search, and you'll find it that way, and you can click on it. There are some things that you can edit. For example, its intensity. Let's say I find that too bright. Maybe I could set it to 2 lux or 1 lux. That's interesting. Maybe I could make the sun disk itself larger. And that is done here with this parameter called source angle. So let's make the sun disk appear even lighter in the sky. If I wanted to get really crazy, I could change the color of the light either by editing the RGB, red, green, blue values, or by double-clicking here and just using the color picker. If I wanted to create some really crazy atmospheres, this would be one way to do it. Okay? So I'm going to cancel that out. I could also use the color temperature. And I could make it warmer or cooler, and I can use those parameters together until I get the look that I want. So this is a heck of a lot of fun if you want to use that technique. So you can always decide how you want your sun to look on the horizon. I like it when the clouds kind of occlude the sun a little bit. I think that's a really interesting look. Okay, lots of ways to control light, however. Now it's dark down here, and there's ways that we're going to need to compensate for that too in the future. But don't worry, all will be covered in due time. So have fun, make some crazy levels, use the starter content materials and meshes, and just have a good time. And next time we will dig even deeper. Thank you for being with me today. I will see you next time.